Following on from part one, here in part two, we'll take a brief look at the major European institutions. I won't read out all the individual slides, but rather add comments when they seem to be appropriate. Let's start with the European Council. The European Council, which is in the second circle of our graph. These are the main workings of the European Council. For instance, it takes the big decisions, new treaties, new members. But as I've already said, there are many areas where they retain the power of decision for reasons of national sovereignty, but also for the management of crises. For instance, the financial crisis of 2007. To continue here, various comments about the nomination and the workings of the European Council. Note that its president represents the EU for security and foreign policy matters, the face of a political Europe. Further details about the European Council. Note about its role. The European Council provides the EU with the necessary impetus for its development and shall define the general political direction and priorities thereof. This is the Treaty of Lisbon. Let's have a look at the European Commission in the centre of our graph here. Here are details about the European Commission. Please note that although the Commission has theoretically the monopoly of initiating proposals, in reality it has much less power, as we've already seen. The Commission has the important role of being guardian of the treaties and making sure that individual member states adhere to the rules and regulations of the various treaties. It represents the EU in the world. Regarding its composition, there are 28 European commissioners. However, per the Lisbon Treaty, there were due to be fewer, but because there was a referendum in Ireland, the latter insisted on having one commissioner per member state. Regarding the number of people in administration, there are 33,000 civil servants within the European Commission, 24,000 based in Brussels and Luxembourg, and 9,000 in the agencies spread throughout the various member countries. Note, however, that in total for all the European institutions there are about 56,000 civil servants, which is the equivalent of the number of people in, say, a large European town. Here are details about the appointment of the European Commissioners and their President. The governments agree on the new President of the Commission, taking into account the results of the European parliamentary elections. However, up until 2014, it was the European Council of Heads of Government who effectively appointed the President of the European Commission. And often they appointed weak presidents in order to buttress their power vis-à-vis the European Commission. However, in 2014, the main winning party within the European parliamentary elections, the European People's Party, managed to insist on having their candidate, Juncker, appointed as President of the European Commission. It's not certain that the European Council of Heads of Government will continue with that sort of policy. Please note as well that the European Parliament auditions the individual European Commissioners and gives an opinion on the whole of the college, which is very similar, or would be similar, for instance, to the government ministers appointed by the government being auditioned by the House of Commons. So that's a sort of advance of democracy that we don't have in our own parliament. Let's have a look at the Council of Ministers, the voice of member countries. At the bottom left of our graph. Here are details about the European Council of Ministers, its role, its members, its seat, and the 10 groupings below. Please note the 10 groupings below, which work on the directives and regulations which are carried out in consultation with the other institutions. Every 6 months, a different member state president of this council and his ministers head up each of these groupings and thus work with the commissioners. But, as with the European Council of Heads of Government, there are several areas where they keep the power of decision for reasons of national sovereignty. For example, defence, security, penal policy. Here we look at how the Council of Ministers votes. A major advance of the Treaty of Lisbon in 2009 was to extend the number of areas where member states could decide by majority vote and not unanimously. Unfortunately, there are still several areas still requiring unanimity, for instance, tax havens. A qualified majority requires the agreement of 55% of member states, representing 65% of the EU's population. But for certain subjects with key sovereignty issues, again, unanimity is required. But a major evolution of the EU treaties is that member states can decide to form an advance guard to proceed further in an area, but subject to certain rules. For instance, the Schengen Agreement regarding free movement within EU countries started in 1985 with only 5 countries and now concerns 26 countries. Let's have a look at the European Parliament, the voice of its citizens, on the bottom right of our graph. Here are some details re the functioning of the European Parliament, including its legislative powers we've already mentioned. It exercises control over the European institutions and votes the European budget together with the Council of Ministers. As from May 2019, there are only going to be 705 European deputies, compared to 751 before Brexit. Here are some details about the composition of the European Parliament up to 2014, when there were 766 members, which was reduced to 751 for the May 2014 European elections, and again will be further reduced to 705 members in May 2019 following Brexit. Here are a couple of reliable websites if you want to investigate further yourself how the European Union functions. I found Europe Direct very useful because here you can ring people in Brussels who then will answer your question, or you can send an email, and I found it particularly useful because they always reply back, and I've been very satisfied with their service. And for those suffering from insomnia and who are searching for a cure, you can try reading the Treaty of Lisbon in detail. Happy reading.